It was 6:47 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day. The long oak table in my mother's dining room was set for 34 people. It was the kind of table that stretched from one end of the dining room to the other. The kind you only pull out once a year when the whole family descends and fills every chair. The turkey was carved. The candles were lit. Someone had folded the cloth napkins into little fans. The house smelled like rosemary and butter and the specific warmth that comes from too many bodies in a room that isn't quite big enough. And my mother was standing up with a wine glass raised like she was about to give a speech at a corporate event. "To the family that actually matters," she said, and she smiled. 33 glasses went up. Wine caught the candlelight. Someone laughed. My sister Diane clinked her glass against my brother Patrick's. My other brother Sean was already eating. He didn't care about toasts. He cared about the sweet potato casserole. Then my mother looked at me. She didn't raise her glass higher or lower. She didn't change her expression. She just looked at me the way you might look at a piece of furniture you were thinking about replacing, and she said it clearly enough for every single person at that table to hear. "You won't get a cent from Grandma. You've never done anything for her." Nobody flinched. Nobody corrected her. 33 people sat there with their glasses still raised and not one of them said a word. I didn't say a word either. I set my napkin on the table. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. I walked out of that house at 6:49 p.m. and I didn't look back. What none of them knew, not my mother, not Diane, not Patrick, not Sean, not a single one of those 34 people at that table, was that I had been taking care of Grandma Margaret for 3 years. Every single week. Sometimes twice a week. Doctor's appointments, grocery runs, medication pickups, plumbing emergencies at 2 a.m. I had been doing it quietly and I had been doing it alone. And 11 days after that Thanksgiving dinner, Grandma Margaret died. 1 week after that, the lawyer called. And that is when everything my mother believed about our family started to fall apart. To understand what happened at that reading, you have to understand who Margaret Callahan was. And to understand that, you have to understand our family. Grandma Margaret, everyone called her Maggie, was 78 years old when this story begins. She lived in a small colonial house on Elm Creek Road in a quiet suburb about 40 minutes outside the city. The house was paid off. Had been paid off for over 20 years. She'd lived there since before my mother was born, and before that she and my grandfather had bought it together for a price that people in our generation can barely comprehend. She was not a wealthy woman in the way most people would understand that word. She didn't drive a luxury car. She didn't wear designer clothes. She shopped at the same grocery store she'd shopped at for 40 years. She clipped coupons out of the Sunday paper even though she didn't need to. Old habits. But here's what most of my family didn't bother to find out. Grandma Maggie had been quietly, methodically investing for decades. My grandfather had been a mechanical engineer. He wasn't flashy about money. He was careful with it. When he died 12 years ago, he left Maggie with more than just the house. He left her with a retirement portfolio that had been growing untouched for over 30 years. And Maggie, sharp as a tack until the very end, had let it keep growing. None of us knew the exact number. Not even my mother. Because nobody thought to ask. And Grandma Maggie never volunteered it. My mother, Karen, was the eldest of Maggie's 3 children. She was the one who ran the family. She was the one who organized holidays, sent the group texts, made the decisions about who sat where at dinner. She was the one who decided somewhere along the line that I was the least important person in our family. I was 19 when that started. I just dropped out of community college. Not because I didn't want to learn, but because I couldn't afford it and my parents wouldn't help. Diane was at a 4-year university, fully funded. My parents paid for her tuition, her apartment, her books, everything. When I asked for even a small loan to finish my degree, my father said, "We can't just give money to everyone, Claire." Diane graduated with honors. My parents threw her a party with over 60 guests. I got my GED through an online program while working 2 jobs. Nobody acknowledged it. That was the pattern. And it continued for years. By the time I was 23, I had worked my way into a stable job at a healthcare nonprofit. I wasn't making a fortune, but I was managing a small team, I was good at what I did, and I was building something real. My mother still introduced me to people at family gatherings as the one who didn't finish school. As if that single fact defined everything about who I was. Diane became a marketing executive. My parents told everyone about it. Patrick became a sales manager. They were proud of that too. Sean was still figuring things out, but he was the baby, so nobody held it against him. And Claire? Claire was the disappointment. Claire was the one who couldn't get her life together. Claire was the one my mother looked at across that Thanksgiving table and dismissed in front of 34 people without a second thought. But here's the thing about Claire that nobody in that room understood. Claire was the only one who visited Grandma Maggie. It started small. I went over one Sunday about 3 years before the Thanksgiving dinner. Diane had mentioned offhand that Grandma had called her and said she felt lonely. Diane said she was busy. Patrick said he'd go sometime. Nobody went. So I did. I knocked on the door at 11 a.m. Grandma opened it in her housecoat, her hair not brushed, a look on her face like she hadn't expected anyone to actually show up. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Claire, come in. I just made coffee." That was the first Sunday. I went back the next Sunday. And the next. Within a month it was every week. I drove 40 minutes each way and I sat in her kitchen and we talked. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 3. She told me about her life. About growing up in Ireland, about meeting my grandfather at a dance hall in 1968. About raising 3 children in a house that was too small but felt enormous because of how much love was in it. And I listened. She listened. Not the way my mother listened, which was really just waiting for her turn to talk. I listened the way you listen to someone who has something important to say and has been waiting a long time for someone to hear it. After about 6 months I started noticing things. Small things. A light bulb in the hallway that had been out for weeks. A leak under the kitchen sink that had left a brown stain on the cabinet. A stack of medical bills on her counter that she hadn't opened. So I fixed the light bulb. I called a plumber for the sink and paid for it. I sat with her and went through the medical bills, one by one, and helped her sort out what insurance would cover and what she needed to pay. She never asked me to do any of it. I just did it. And every time I did, she'd look at me with this expression. Quiet, grateful, a little surprised, like she still couldn't believe someone had bothered. "You're the only one who comes, you know," she said to me one Tuesday in March, about 2 years into my visits. It wasn't a complaint. It was just a fact. She said it the way you'd state the weather. I didn't tell her that I knew. I didn't tell her that I'd called my mother 3 times to suggest that someone else in the family visit more often. I didn't tell her that my mother had said each time, some version of "she's fine. She's old. That's what old people do." I just squeezed Grandma's hand and said, "I like coming over." And I meant it. In September, about 2 months before that Thanksgiving dinner, Grandma Maggie started declining. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, the way these things usually are. She started forgetting small things. Where she'd put her keys. Whether she'd eaten breakfast. Once I arrived on a Tuesday and found her sitting in the living room in the dark, the TV off, staring at nothing. She didn't seem to know what day it was. I took her to her doctor the next morning. Dr. Ellen Marsh had been Grandma's physician for over 15 years. She pulled me aside after the appointment and said in a calm, clinical voice, "Mrs. Callahan is showing early signs of cognitive decline. It's not advanced, but it's there. She's going to need more support." I asked if anyone else in the family knew. Dr. Marsh looked at me carefully. "You're listed as her emergency contact, Claire. You've been attending every appointment for the last 8 months. As far as I can tell, you're the one providing her care." I had been for a while without even realizing it had become that much of my life. I was the one who refilled her prescriptions at the pharmacy on Maple Street every 3rd Thursday. I was the one who called her every single morning at 8:15 a.m., just to make sure she was up and eating. I was the one who noticed one Sunday that she had forgotten to pay her electric bill for 2 months in a row. Not because she couldn't afford it, but because the paperwork had confused her. I fixed it quietly. He never knew. And still no one else in the family had called once to ask how she was doing. I called my mother that evening. I explained what Dr. Marsh had said. I asked if Karen could come help, even just once a week, even just to sit with Grandma so I could take a break. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Claire, I have a full-time job. Diane has a full-time job. We can't all rearrange our lives because Grandma is getting old. That's what happens. She'll be fine." I called again 2 weeks later. Same answer. A little less patient. I called a 3rd time in late October, after I'd spent an entire weekend at Grandma's house because she'd gotten confused and tried to leave at 3 a.m., convinced she needed to pick up my mother from school. This time my mother didn't just dismiss me. She got frustrated. You're spending too much time there, Claire. Starting to seem weird. We have a life. Normal people don't do this. Just let her be. I hung up. I didn't call again. That was 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. 3 weeks before my mother stood up at that dinner table and told 34 people that I had never done anything for Grandma Margaret. I sat through that toast. I heard every word. And I said nothing because I had learned a long time ago that arguing with my mother in front of the family was a losing battle. He controlled the narrative. He always had. So I left. Quietly. And I went home and I called Grandma Maggie and I asked her if she wanted company the next morning. Yes, she said. I'd like that very much. Grandma Margaret died on December 8th. I was there. I was there because I had been there almost every day for the previous 2 weeks, ever since her condition had worsened. I had taken unpaid leave from work. I had slept on her couch 4 nights in a row. I had called her doctor, spoken to the hospice nurse, made sure her medications were correct, held her hand through the bad hours and made her tea during the good ones. She died at 4:22 p.m. on a Tuesday. The hospice nurse was in the next room. I was sitting in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand. She didn't say anything dramatic at the end. She didn't give me a final speech. She just squeezed my fingers one more time very lightly and then she was gone. I sat there for a long time afterward. I don't know how long. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe an hour. The room was very quiet. Then I made the phone calls. I called the hospice office first. Then I called the funeral home. Grandma had already arranged everything through a pre-need plan, so there wasn't much to do. Then I called my mother. Karen answered on the second ring. I told her in a flat voice that Grandma had died. There was a pause on the other end. Then my mother said, "Oh, was anyone with her?" "Yes," I said. "I was." Another pause. "I'll call Diane and the boys. We'll figure out the funeral." That was the entire conversation. 12 seconds of silence, 2 questions and a plan to figure it out. "No, are you okay?" "No, I'm sorry." Nothing. The funeral was held 3 days later. Small. Quiet. 41 people attended, mostly Grandma's old neighbors and a few friends from her church. My mother wore a black dress she'd bought the morning of. Diane brought flowers that cost more than Grandma spent on groceries in a month. Patrick and Sean stood at the back and left early. I stood at the graveside alone after everyone else had drifted toward the parking lot. I stayed for 15 minutes. I didn't cry. I had done my crying in that quiet room on Tuesday afternoon alone with her hand in mine. At the funeral I just felt empty. Like someone had reached into my chest and removed something that had been keeping me steady for years. Grandma Maggie was the only person in my family who had ever made me feel like I mattered. And now she was gone. It was 5 days after the funeral, 10 days after her death, when the group chat exploded. My mother had gotten an email from Grandma's estate attorney, a man named Daniel Callahan. No relation to us despite the shared last name, just a coincidence that Grandma had always found amusing. The email was straightforward. A will reading had been scheduled. All named parties were required to attend. The date was set for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. What happened next in that group chat told me everything I needed to know about my family. Within an hour of my mother forwarding the email, Diane had sent a message. "Okay, so what do we think the house is worth?" I looked it up. Elm Creek Road properties are going for $580,000 to $640,000 right now. Patrick replied, plus whatever savings she had. Dad mentioned she had money somewhere. Sean, are we splitting it 4 ways or 3? Does Claire even count? My mother, we'll figure it out at the reading. Everyone just show up and be normal. Nobody mentioned Grandma. Not once. Not a single person in that thread said rest in peace, or I'm going to miss her, or anything close to it. It was a real estate transaction. That's what it was to them. I read every message. I didn't reply to any of it. I already knew what the will said. Not because I had snooped or manipulated or done anything my mother would later accuse me of doing. I knew because Grandma had told me herself. 6 months earlier, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, she had asked me to sit down. She had a cup of tea in her hand and a look on her face that I hadn't seen before. Serious, deliberate, like she had been thinking about something for a long time and had finally decided to say it out loud. "Claire," she said, "I want you to know something. About the will." I told her she didn't have to tell me. She waved her hand and said, I want to. It's important. She told me everything. The house. The investments. The savings account she'd kept separate from the checking account for 15 years. All of it. And she told me who it was going to. I know it's a lot, she said. And I know it's going to cause a fuss. But I've thought about it very carefully and I know what I want. I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, Grandma, are you sure? She smiled. It was the warmest smile I had ever seen on her face. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Thursday, 2 p.m. The offices of Callahan and Associates, on the 14th floor of a downtown high-rise. The conference room was large. Larger than it needed to be. A long mahogany table. Leather chairs. A window that looked out over the city. A box of tissues on the table which struck me as a small, thoughtful detail that said a lot about how often these meetings went. I arrived at 1:45. The receptionist smiled and led me to the room. I was alone for about 4 minutes. I sat in one of the chairs near the end of the table, folded my hands and breathed. My mother arrived at 1:52 with Diane. They were dressed well, not morning clothes exactly but polished. Put together. Diane had her hair done. My mother had on a blazer I hadn't seen before. They sat across from me without speaking. My mother glanced at me once, quickly, the way you glance at something you'd rather not see. Patrick arrived at 1:57. Sean showed up at 1:59, slightly out of breath, phone still in his hand. Mr. Daniel Callahan entered at exactly 2 p.m. He was a tall man in his mid-60s. Gray hair neatly combed. Dark suit. Reading glasses on a chain around his neck. He carried a manila folder and a leather portfolio, and he set them both on the table with the kind of quiet precision that told you he had done this many, many times before. Good afternoon, he said. Thank you all for being here. I want to start by saying that I'm sorry for your loss. Margaret was a dear friend and I know this is a difficult time. He paused. He looked around the table. My mother nodded. Diane shifted in her chair. Patrick checked his watch. I'm going to read the will now, Mr. Callahan continued. It is legally binding. It was executed on June 14th of this year, approximately 6 months before Margaret's passing. It was witnessed by 2 parties unrelated to this family, and it was notarized at my office. I want to be clear about that before we begin because it's important. He opened the manila folder. The estate of Margaret and Callahan includes the following assets. He adjusted his glasses. The property at 14 Elm Creek Road, assessed at $620,000. A savings account at Brookfield National Bank, holding $487,000. A brokerage investment account, currently valued at $1,214,000. And a secondary savings account, holding $41,000 in miscellaneous funds. He paused. The room was very still. $2,362,000. That was the number. I watched my mother do the math in her head. I watched Diane's eyes go wide. I watched Patrick sit up straighter in his chair. The bequests, Mr. Callahan said, and he turned the page. To Karen Donovan, $5,000. My mother blinked. She didn't say anything but something shifted in her face, a small tightening around the eyes. To Diane Donovan, $5,000. Diane's mouth opened slightly. She closed it. To Patrick Donovan, $5,000. Patrick looked at the table. To Sean Donovan, $5,000. Sean looked at my mother. He didn't look back. Mr. Callahan turned the page again. He took a breath. And then he read the next line. The entirety of the remaining estate, including all property, all accounts and all assets not otherwise specified, is to be given to Claire Marie Donovan. Nobody spoke. The silence lasted for 10 seconds. I counted. 10 full seconds where nobody in that room made a sound. No breathing that I could hear. No shifting. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant noise of the city 14 stories below us. Then Mr. Callahan said, "There is also a letter." He reached into the leather portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper, cream-colored, folded once. He unfolded it carefully as if handling something fragile. And he read it aloud. To my granddaughter Claire. This letter is meant to explain my decision, though I don't think it needs much explaining to anyone who is paying attention. Claire visited me every week for 3 years. She drove 40 minutes each way and she never once complained about it. He took me to my doctor when no one else would. He paid my bills when I was too proud to ask. He sat with me on the hard days and made me tea on the good ones. He was there when I was frightened. She was there when I was lonely. She was there when I was dying. I watched my other grandchildren grow up and I love them. But Claire is the only one who ever showed up for me, not because she had to. Not because someone told her to. But she wanted to. I have thought carefully about this decision, and I have made it with a clear mind and a full heart. Use this to build the life you deserve, my dear girl. You have earned it. With all my love, Grandma Maggie. Mr. Callahan folded the letter and set it down on the table. The silence this time was different. It wasn't the stunned silence of a few moments ago. It was heavier. Thicker. It had weight to it. I was crying. I hadn't planned to cry. I hadn't wanted to. But the letter, hearing her voice in those words, hearing her say the things she had never said out loud to me not once in all those years, it broke something open in my chest that I couldn't hold back. My mother was the first one to speak. "This is a mistake," she said. Her voice was very controlled. Very flat. "Read it again." Mr. Callahan looked at her over his glasses. "Mrs. Donovan, I have read it correctly. The will is clear. It can't be right. Claire didn't, she wasn't." My mother stopped. She seemed to catch herself as if she realized she was about to say something that would sound very bad in front of a lawyer. Diane spoke next. "There has to be an error. Grandma wasn't thinking clearly. She had cognitive decline. Everyone knows that." Mr. Callahan nodded slowly. "I understand your concern. But I want to draw your attention to two things. First, this will was executed on June 14th, nearly 6 months before Margaret's passing, and well before any significant cognitive decline was documented. Second, I have a statement from Dr. Ellen Marsh, Margaret's physician, confirming that Margaret was of sound mind and full legal capacity at the time of signing." He opened the portfolio again and slid a printed document across the table. It was Dr. Marsh's statement. 1 page. Dated. Signed. "Furthermore," Mr. Callahan continued, "I have in my records phone logs showing Claire's calls to Margaret, an average of 4 per week over the past 3 years. I have hospital visitor records from Margaret's hospitalization last April, showing Claire present every single day for 9 consecutive days. I have receipts for medications, home repairs and grocery deliveries, all paid for by Claire. And I have a sworn statement from Margaret's neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Harrington, confirming that Claire was, to her knowledge, the only family member who visited on a regular basis." He let that sit for a moment. "Any contest to this will," he said, "would fail. The evidence is overwhelming and it is documented. I say this not to be unkind, but because I want to save you the expense and the time. Margaret was very clear about what she wanted. And she wanted Claire to have it." The room was quiet again. Patrick was the next to speak and his voice had a hard edge to it. "So she just gets everything? And we get $5,000 each. That is what the will states, yes." "That's not fair," Sean said, and he sounded, for the first time in his life, genuinely upset. "We're her grandchildren too." Mr. Callahan looked at him with an expression that was not unkind, but was also not sympathetic. "Fairness," he said gently, "is a matter of perspective. Margaret made her decision based on what she experienced. And what she experienced was that one person in this room showed up for her. The will reflects that." My mother had gone very pale. She was staring at the table, at her hands, at nothing in particular. Diane was looking at me for the first time all afternoon, and there was something in her expression I couldn't quite read. Anger, yes, but underneath it something else. Something that looked almost like shame. I didn't say anything. I sat in my chair with tears still drying on my face and I looked at Mr. Callahan and I said, "Thank you for reading that." He nodded. "The meeting is concluded. Claire, I'll be in touch with you this week regarding the next steps in executing the estate. The rest of you are welcome to stay as long as you need." He gathered his folder and his portfolio and he left the room. My mother stood up. "Claire," she said. Her voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk about this." I stood up too. I picked up my coat. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years, and I said very quietly, "No, we don't." And I walked out. The calls started that evening. My mother called me 14 times between 5 p.m. and midnight. I didn't answer any of them. At 12:17 a.m. she sent a text. We need to discuss this like adults. Call me in the morning. I didn't call her in the morning. By the next day the family had regrouped. Diane called me at 9 a.m. Her tone was different from the conference room. Softer, more careful, like she was handling something delicate. Claire, listen. Nobody is saying you don't deserve something. But $5,000 each? That's nothing. Grandma would want us to work this out as a family. I listened to her talk for about 30 seconds. Then I said, Diane, the will said what it said. But I have to go. I hung up. By Thursday of that week, exactly 1 week after the reading, my mother had called me 47 times. 47. I know because I counted. Patrick had sent 11 texts. Sean had left 3 voicemails, each one more frustrated than the last. Diane had sent a single long email that I read once and didn't reply to. The messages fell into predictable phases. Phase 1 was denial. This can't be right. There must be another will. Grandma would never do this. Phase 2 was anger. You manipulated her. You turned her against us. This is exactly what you wanted. Phase 3 was bargaining. Just give us the house. Keep the money. Split it 50-50 and we'll drop it. Come on, Claire. We're family. Phase 4, the one that came last and the one that told me the most, was desperation. Please. We need to talk. Just pick up the phone. I didn't pick up the phone. On the following Monday, my mother retained a lawyer of her own, a man named Gregory Hale who specialized in estate disputes. She filed a formal notice of intent to contest the will on the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. I found out about it when Mr. Callahan called me. Mrs. Donovan has filed, he said, calm as always. I want you to know that this is not unusual. It happens frequently in cases like this. And I also want you to know that it is going to fail. He walked me through the evidence again. The phone records, the visitor logs, the receipts, Dr. Marsh's statement, the neighbor's testimony. He told me that the will had been executed 6 months before Grandma's death, well before any documented decline. He told me that 2 unrelated witnesses had been present at the signing. He told me that Margaret had updated the will 3 separate times over the course of 2 years, and that every single version said the same thing. This contest will not succeed, he said. But it will cost your mother money. Attorney fees for a case like this typically run between $15,000 and $40,000. And if the contest fails, which it will, she will also be responsible for your legal fees, which I estimate at somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. I asked him if there was anything I needed to do. No, he said. Just let the process run its course. I'll handle everything. The contest was formally heard 6 weeks later in probate court. I attended, but I didn't need to do anything. Mr. Callahan presented the evidence, quietly, methodically, one document at a time. Gregory Hale tried to argue that Grandma had been mentally incapacitated, that I had isolated her from the rest of the family, that the will was the product of manipulation. The judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Weiss, listened to every word. She reviewed every document. She asked a few questions. And then she issued her ruling. The evidence overwhelmingly supports the decedent's wishes, she said. This court finds no indication of undue influence, coercion, or lack of testamentary capacity. The will of Margaret and Callahan is valid, properly executed, and will stand as written. The contest is denied. She paused. I would also note, she added, that the cost of this proceeding will be borne by the contesting party. And I would strongly advise against any further frivolous litigation in this matter, or sanctions will be considered. Gregory Hale did not look happy. My mother, sitting 3 rows back, did not look at anyone. The total cost of the failed contest came to $34,200. My mother paid every cent of it. On top of the $5,000 she had already received, the only thing Grandma had left her, she had now spent nearly 7 times that amount trying to take what wasn't hers. The weeks after the ruling were quiet. Quieter than I expected. My mother stopped calling. Diane sent one more text, just 2 words, I'm sorry, and then nothing. Patrick and Sean went silent entirely. The group chat, which had been buzzing with messages for years, went completely dead. I didn't reach out to any of them. I spent the first few weeks after the estate was settled doing what Grandma would have wanted me to do. I went to the house on Elm Creek Road. I walked through every room. I touched the things that had been hers. The photographs on the mantel, the old books on the shelf, the mug she always drank her coffee from. I sat in her kitchen in her chair and I cried for a while. Not because of the money. Because of her. Because she was gone and no amount of inheritance could change that. When the grief settled into something quieter, something I could carry without it overwhelming me, I started thinking about what to do with what she had left me. I kept the house. Not to sell it, not to flip it, not to make money off of it. I kept it because it was hers and because it meant something. I had it cleaned and repaired, fixed the things that had been broken, painted the rooms she'd been meaning to paint. I made it the house she would have wanted it to be, if she'd had someone to help her sooner. I donated a portion of the savings to the hospice organization that had cared for Grandma in her final days. Another portion went to a scholarship fund at the local community college, the kind of help I never got for people like me, and I kept the rest. Quietly. Carefully. The way Grandma had kept it. Not because I needed to show anyone, but because it was hers and now it was mine and I intended to honor it. I visit her grave once a week. On Tuesdays. The same day I used to visit her at the house. I bring her a cup of tea, Earl Grey, the kind she liked, and I sit on the bench near the headstone and I talk to her for a while. About my week. About the house. About nothing in particular. It feels strange talking to someone who can't answer. But it also feels right. Sometimes I think about that toast at Thanksgiving. My mother's glass raised. The wine catching the light. To the family that actually matters. I think about the 33 glasses that went up. I think about the 10 seconds of silence in that conference room when Mr. Callahan read my name. And I think about the letter. The one Grandma wrote. The one she folded and left in a leather portfolio with her lawyer, 6 months before she died, knowing exactly what it would do when it was read out loud. You have earned it, my dear girl. I didn't earn it because I wanted the money. I didn't earn it because I was trying to prove something to my mother or to anyone else in that room. I earned it because I showed up. Week after week, year after year, I showed up for the one person in my life who had ever made me feel like I was enough. And in the end, she showed up for me too. My mother called me one last time about 2 months after the ruling. Late at night. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short, just a few sentences. I listened to it once. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask for anything. She just said, I hope you know what you've done to this family, Claire. I listened to it. I thought about it for a while. And then I deleted it. Some things once they're said can't be unsaid. And some doors once they close don't have to open again. I made my peace with that a long time ago. I just didn't know until Grandma Maggie showed me that it was okay to let go.